Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to another episode. I'm Mike and Davina, and thank you so much for listening. In this episode, I'm talking with Kevin Dietz. Kevin is a super talented recording and mixing engineer and producer. He's worked with artists such as Placebo, Silverchair, Alexisonfire, Billy Talent, Protest the Hero, Stone Sour, and so many more. He's also helped other engineers such as David Bottrell, Kevin Shirley, James Brown, and even more. We cover a really wide range of topics in this conversation, including a discussion about his path from getting an internship at one of the biggest studios in Canada to very quickly rising to the top and becoming a head engineer. So we share some great tips on how he did that. He also gives us some great technical advice on how to clean up our low end using high-pass filters. We talk about mixing vocals with serial compression, how to keep organized using templates to speed up your workflow. And lastly, he shares some really great advice and insight on some things that you can do in order to really help master your tools faster. So things that will help you learn what different EQs and compressors sound like, and just really understand what you're listening for in your mixes. So I think we have a really great conversation. There's a lot of really good advice in here, and I can't wait for you to check it out. So let's get right into it. So Kevin, thanks for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So for people who might not be familiar with who you are, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, how you got into this?
I am a producer, mixer, engineer, and I got into this line of work through the engineering side. I was on staff at Metalworks Studios in Mississauga for a little over 7 years, about 7.5 years. Started as, an assistant or runner, but then staff engineer, and then eventually head engineer. And yeah, so I was there for 7.5 years.
It's amazing. How long did it take you between the interning and becoming the head engineer?
Well, I guess I interned there for about a month, and there were, there were a few guys on staff there, and a couple of them were leaving. So everyone was sort of bumping up. The head engineer, at the time, he left. He went freelance, and so everyone kind of bumped up, and they needed a few more guys. So they hired, they got two of us on as interns, and then it was probably about a month of interning before they hired us both on and said, "Okay, cool, you guys you're now assistants." And it was a slow start. As an assistant, you start out just doing the very basic stuff, and from there it was just a steady progression over time, and eventually you just kind of find yourself as a staff engineer. All of a sudden, you're just doing sessions on your own. And then the head engineer thing, I can't remember exactly when that was. It might have been 2011, I think, at some point. The head engineer who had been bumped up when I came on board, he went freelance. And the studio manager at the time, Paul Gross, approached me and said, "I want to name you as the head engineer." I said, "Great, cool."
That's awesome. That's like the dream story, right? Like so many people get these internships, and I feel like so many people just give up after, a month or two of it. And
it's so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was very fortunate. Metalworks was very busy at the time. A few people had left. They needed more bodies. So it was, it's a tough environment right now because there's so many people doing it and wanting to do it. So many people coming out of recording schools and things like that. And the opportunities just aren't there like they used to be in that big studio sense, in that very traditional sense. I really wanted to do it in that traditional way, like all of my, kind of heroes had done, all the people I looked up to. And I really wanted that high level apprenticeship, if you will. So I was just very fortunate. It was a combination of right place at the right time to get my foot in the door. And then once I had my foot in the door, once I was in there, I was just full bore, full time. They couldn't get me to leave. I just approached it as a full-time career thing and just went, man,
Awesome. So what do you think made you stand out from the pack then? Because obviously, yeah, like you said, there's so many people that are trying to do this and trying to get those spots, right? But there's so few spots available.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, again, it was, I would say, a combination of right time, right place, and, assertiveness on my part. I went in there and I said, I want a job here. So I went in and assertively pursued that opportunity. But once I got it, then it was, I didn't know when I started that the internship would lead to a paid position, but I was just there every day. I was there 7 days a week. I was there full time regardless, because I figured, I want to do this. So I'll just approach it like a full-time job, even if I don't know if that's what it's going to end up being.
That's the right attitude to have for it, for sure.
You kind of have to in anything you do with music. If you open your own studio, you've got to, as Henry Rollins says, you got to hit it with some tenacity, right? You got to hit the ground running, and you got to just go for it.
Yep. So what made you get into mixing in the first place? Like, are you a musician yourself?
Yeah, I started out playing guitar as a teenager and played in a few bands. I'm from Edmonton originally, so I did all that out there. I was briefly in a music program out there on guitar, learning music theory and performance and all that stuff, with the idea of majoring in recording after. I was just always fascinated by the recording thing. Even in bands, it was all about whenever we'd rent a PA or a 4-track or something to do demos, I was always interested in fiddling with that stuff as opposed to songwriting and stuff like that. I really liked the sound aspect of it, and I went. I took a studio course in Edmonton, and was kind of hanging around and doing some stuff out of a studio called Power Sound Studios in Edmonton that's run by a guy named Phil Anderson, who is he's got the best studio out there. So Phil kind of got me started on the whole thing, and we still keep in touch, and he's put me in touch with people out here. So he was a great early mentor. And where am I going with this? This is the whole backstory.
It's all good.
I moved out here. I wanted to pursue it full time as a career. So I moved out here, took a year of schooling in audio engineering, and then got this opportunity at Metalworks, and hit the ground running.
So you said that you started with doing going to school for performance. It sounds like, right? Like guitar.
Yeah.
Why go that route when you knew that you wanted to get into recording? Why not just jump right into the recording side of things?
Well, that's a good question, and that's exactly what after a semester of doing that, I thought to myself. I thought the exact same thing. Wait, why am I doing this when I really just want to jump into recording? And that's what I did. I have some friends that live out here now and are gigging guitar players and musicians in Toronto now that went to the same program back in Edmonton. There's a lot of us from out west out here now, and I've talked with them about it. It's a very difficult program. Think of all the guys and girls that go through the Humber program. And that's a 4-year thing, and I admire the hell out of people that do that and complete it. It's a lot of work, and admittedly, I wasn't ready for that level of dedication to the instrument, and it took me a semester before I realized, what, I should just jump right into the recording thing, and that's when I linked up with Phil at Power Sound, and the course was set from there.
Well, there's definitely something to be said for just diving right into it, right? Rather than kind of just trying it on your own forever and doing other things that aren't really going to help you with your end goal. So it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Although having said that, what I learned in terms of music theory and certain things on the instrument, that's helped a lot.
Yeah,
I
in
don't
terms
regret
of what,
that at all. Just in terms of musicality, I feel like for me, my whole approach to engineering, mixing, music production, on both the technical and the artistic sides, it's all about the music. It's all really about elevating ideas and sonics, elevating those things musically. So having an understanding of music from the performance and the, I guess for lack of a better word, the theory side of music, but being able to speak that language to a degree. I'm not saying I'm some of the session players that I get to work with, they blow my mind with their musical knowledge and how they can apply it on the fly to what they do. That's one of my favorite parts of the job, is getting to work with high level musicians like that. I admire them so much.
Well, it makes all the difference too, and your sessions go by
Absolutely.
way easier when you have great players too.
Oh man, yeah, big time. But it helps me too, because we're able to communicate ideas, and it's interesting what happens when you start thinking less technically. Obviously that stuff's got to be, you've got to have that locked down, and you've got to have that running in the background at all times. But when you have that going subconsciously, I guess, and you're consciously focused on the music, and you're using all those studio tools and all the gear and the mixing techniques and whatever recording techniques to really elevate the music, I think that's where things really start to shine. That's what I'm constantly in search of, and that's what I try to practice and preach.
That's awesome. So in terms of the producing side of things, then, how involved do you like to get when you're producing an album? Like, do you get involved in a lot of the songwriting, or do you like to kind of just leave that to the band and then you stick to just the engineering side? Like, what's your role as a producer?
I like to be very, very involved in terms of the songwriting. I've never reckoned myself a songwriter. That's not my strong point. I always do best when the spark of inspiration comes from the artist and they have a really solid idea or a song, even if it's just a piano and vocal or piano and acoustic guitar, or if it's a 4 or 5 piece band, if they have the basic arrangement and the basic outline of what they want to do. From there, I can jump on and I've got ideas and arrangement things, and we can work together, we can collaborate and come up with something great. That's where I feel I'm really able to jump on. But I do like to do that early in the process. Pre-production is essential. Getting it, even just oftentimes if you're working with someone from far away and they're coming in just for the studio sessions, they don't really have time to come a week before where we can rehearse and stuff like that. Getting the demos and just getting familiar with the songs and talking with them about the arrangements and going over some ideas beforehand. It's so valuable. So I like all of that. I like getting involved. Yeah.
So you said you like to focus on the arrangement and all that kind of stuff. In your opinion, what makes a good song then?
Well, the arrangement is a huge part of that. What else?
Like, is there something that you're trying to really push, like a direction you're trying to push the band in when they come to you with an idea? Like, how do you what's your thought process when you get those demos, and how do you flush those out into a fully produced track?
That always depends. It depends so much on the song itself, the vibe. You talk with the band, you talk with the musicians, the artist about what they want, and they might have some very specific references or some very specific sounds thereafter, or a specific vibe. So that changes person to person. But I think overall, what makes a good song is like a great groove, or like a feel rhythmically. That's always, I know that I personally gravitate toward that a lot. Like a solid melody that supports the emotion of the song, and like we were just talking about, the arrangement, something that makes sense and keeps the song moving along. I've heard in recent years, there's a couple songs I can think of by big artists that I've heard on the radio, pop songs, and I can't get into them because the arrangement makes no sense to me. Things are not moving. It seems really jerky, and all of a sudden you've got another melody coming in that is not really related to what was happening before. Just things that just don't make sense. Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of a pet peeve of mine. I like arrangements that work, that sound good. And
I'm with you.
And then just an inspired performance, I want to hear the musicians digging in, or being, nice and soft and emotional, whatever the song calls for. But I just want to believe what I'm hearing. I don't want to feel like they're putting it on. Like, make me believe what you're singing and playing.
Yeah, it's got to be authentic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So what's a common mistake that you see a lot of artists make before entering the studio?
The thing that really comes to mind is when an artist or a band tries to cram way too much into a studio session, like in a short period of time. They want to do, we want to get a full album live off the floor in one day. Okay, that's those are some lofty goals. There's very few people that can pull that off, and I don't know why anyone would want to. It's not to say that everything has to be a certain way and compartmentalized, and no, we have to do drums, and then we'll overdub bass, and then we'll overdub this. There's many different ways to approach record making, but you've got to talk about those things, and you've got to give them enough time to make them happen. I mean, I've been on sessions before where things are just crammed in, and it never works out.
Yeah, for sure. So then let's shift over a little more towards your mixing side of things. You do a lot of mixing as well. What's your mindset when you go into a mix? How do you start? Where do you start? Do you have a typical process you follow?
I guess maybe less on a technical side. The first thing I want to do is find out what the core elements of a song are. Is it like is it the groove? Is there like a really pronounced kick, snare, hat, and bass groove, something like that? Is that the foundation of the song? It's kind of like, usually a few elements will stick out as the main, making up the main vibe of a song, and they're providing the foundation and the core emotion of the song. So I'll start with those, and a lot of the times it is the rhythmic elements. I think that's just like a natural thing that human beings gravitate toward. And so, I'll start with those. But then other than the rhythmic elements, there might be like a keyboard melody, or there might be a guitar part that really stands out. And you realize that this is going to be a core element. So I need to get that kind of in the forefront, or where it needs to be first, before these other parts that are maybe more support parts. So it's really all about the core elements. Daniel Lanois calls it the center. He's like, get your center right. I remember him saying in one interview, and he usually means the vocal by that.
Yeah.
He records the vocal sometimes first, and then builds around that.
So when you're mixing and you're going at it from that perspective, in terms of your levels and gain staging and all that kind of stuff, do you typically start by trying to get things at a certain level and then build around that?
Quite often, yeah. Sometimes I mix completely in the box, and sometimes I go like a hybrid setup. Like I have an SSL bus compressor and a little summing mixer, a dangerous summing mixer, and this company called Sonic Farm out of Vancouver. These guys make these really high-end tube and transformer boxes, preamps and things like that, but that also have line inputs so you can mix through them. So it's kind of like going through the center section of a console, in which case, you're dealing with different levels. So yeah, I will often start out by kind of sussing out what my nominal level is. And I have it set up so that I run a tone through and I find out what 0 VU is running through my system. And I work from there. So a lot of it is second nature. But yeah, you kind of got to know how far up to push that kick drum, and how much it's making the bus compressor bounce. And then you go from there. Things like that. So yeah, I will suss out the initial levels first with those main elements. And that's kind of a tricky thing to explain technically, because it's different if you're completely in the box versus if you're incorporating some analog gear. Yeah, that's a tricky one to explain technically, I guess.
Yeah.
It's all about knowing gain staging and unity gain and things like that. All just important engineering principles that if you understand those things, you can figure it out, whether you're in the box or completely analog or a combination of both. I usually set aside a whole day for a mix. Like I block that off in my calendar. And in terms of concentrated mix work, I'd say generally 8 hours or so. Sometimes I'll finish up something at midnight or whatever, and then I'll go, okay, I'm gonna leave it here, and then I'll listen with fresh ears in the morning, and make some final tweaks, and then I send it off. So sometimes it's good to just, when you're at the end of, when I'm at the end of the day, when I'm at the end of the mix, I shut it down, and then I come back to it first thing the next day with fresh ears, and then send it off. So, just so I have that extra little refresher before I send it off to the artist, so that, gives me a little buffer to make sure I'm cool with everything first.
Makes a lot of sense. And how do you know when you're done a mix?
You just kind of feel it. I don't really know. I don't think I've ever been a real tweaker type, like obsessed over the minutia to the point where I can't settle on something. I'm not that guy, so I just kind of feel it. I have a roadmap in my head, I'm gonna do vocal rides, I'm gonna automate this and that. And as I go through something that I may not have heard before, oh, you know what? I should really bump up the vocal delay when the chorus hits. So then I'll go back and do that. I might jump around a little. There's a point at which I feel that I'm sort of jumping around. I'll be doing some vocal rides, but then I'll be like, oh, you know what? I got to bump up that bass note there. I'll do that, and I'll jump around, do all these little things, and then I'm kind of at the end of the list, at the end of my mental list, and I go, okay. Then I listen through and I go, nothing's standing out to me. I guess it's done.
I think it's important to have that list, like you said, because so many people just are constantly searching for stuff to do, right? And especially coming back to it the next morning, like you said, I think that's a thing a lot of people do as well, where they get burnt out working long hours on a mix, and the next day they come back to it, and then it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do to it now that I have fresh ears,
Yes.
So I think having that list is definitely a big thing.
No doubt. And also to speak to that about the coming back next day, also taking frequent breaks throughout the day. That's another thing. Like I might set aside a day for a mix. I might have other stuff to do too. So I might work on 2 songs in a day, if it's like the same artist, to not totally get out of that headspace. But taking ear breaks is really important too. I mix mostly from home, so I can I just walk into the kitchen and grab a coffee, or I take the dog out for a walk, and 15 minutes of getting your head out of the out from between the speakers, maybe getting some fresh air, and some sunshine. It's amazing what that can do. You come back in and things just sound so much clearer, and it just makes more sense.
Yep, definitely. So you've been doing it for quite a while now. At what point did you feel like you started to really make good mixes?
Yeah, I guess being on staff at a studio, you end up mixing some stuff pretty early on. Starting with, I guess the first sessions I would do on my own would be maybe someone bringing in an instrumental and singing over it, or a singer-songwriter doing just an acoustic guitar and a vocal, or a guy coming in with like a hip-hop 2-track and rapping over it and layering some vocals, and then you quote-unquote mix that, So, but those don't really count, do they? In terms of actual mixing.
There is some artistry depending on how slammed it comes to you, right?
Yeah. But I guess, so from there, you start recording full bands, and you do stuff, and some of it's okay and some of it's not very good and whatever. I guess for me, I remember working with a band who, these guys were all music school guys. Actually, I think they had gone to the same music school I did in Edmonton. They were from out west as well. Doing some heavy kind of progressive rock stuff, very Tool-ish, but a lot more, I don't know, a little more crazy than that. Very good, really cool stuff, really heavy, all great musicians. And when I mixed that stuff, it turned out really well. And this is probably 7 years ago. It was probably like summer 2010, I think. And I remember finishing up that stuff and going, man, this turned out really well. And I played it for some people, and they were like, yeah, great. The mastering engineer who mastered it said, good work. Yeah, he'd actually been coaching me on some mix stuff, and he mastered that, and he said, hey, good job. This sounds really solid. I was like, yeah, it's really good. I throw those songs on sometimes to sort of refresh my mind on what that was all about, and I still like them.
That's the sign, right?
I still like it. And I feel like I really got the low end tight on those tracks. So I thought, yeah, this is good. Now, again, the musicians were fantastic. These guys were great players. There was no editing to be done. There was no tuning to be done. These guys brought their A game, and it sounds fantastic. So I was very free to focus on the artistic elements of that. But yeah, it turned out great, and I still really dig those songs and those mixes. So there you go.
That's awesome.
All uphill from there.
So you had mentioned that one of the things in that specific track that, you look back at it now and you say, oh, I nailed the low end, and it's awesome. Do you have any tips for getting the low end right? Is there something that you do in all your mixes, or any certain trickery?
Well, I think one of the big things is with low end, your monitoring is really important, and your room. Like, you don't want those two things working against you, right? This particular band that I did that we were just talking about, I recorded them at Metalworks in the Neve room, and then we mixed their stuff in the SSL mix room. It's a very good mix room. It's it sounds great. The low end is super accurate. Everything's just super accurate in that room. So that really helped. I could turn it up loud to check like the impact of it, and I could listen quiet, and it just translated really well. So I was working in a great room with great monitors. Now, that's a professionally built studio with an SSL console and, a couple sets of monitors and mains and all this stuff. I don't have that at home when I mix, but I have good monitoring. I've treated my room a little, and I keep the volume at a level where I know I'm not going to be causing problems for myself. So that's an important factor, just from the outset, But other than that, on a technical level, I think for me a big part of getting the low end right is high pass filtering. Just a lot of I get rid of low end information that or noise that's not needed, like rolling off, below 100 hertz on guitars, for example. But even using a high pass filter at, say, 40 hertz or 35 or 45 hertz on subs and things like that. I've recently, been doing a lot of pop music, and so you've got a lot of synth stuff and a lot of low end synth stuff. And you listen to pop records and hip hop records and like all the OVO stuff, and the low end is just unbelievably rich, and it goes super low, but it translates on all types of speakers. So, I'm looking to achieve that type of thing. And for me, I've found that, maybe there's some subs hitting, but they don't need all that speaker shaking information. That might be coming from something else, or a really low bass pad, that might not have all the low end. It might be the subs that are carrying that low end. And in a rock mix, it's about where does the kick drum, how low does that go versus the bass, and what are they playing and how do they fit together? So I think it's a combination of balance and EQ to mostly taking away, not necessarily boosting, but oftentimes it's taking away. So high pass filtering, I got high pass filters on everything, man.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah,
I think so that's important. One of those things that so many people overlook because they either just can't hear it or they don't think to use it, and it's really like one of the easiest things you could do to just really clean up all of that.
Oh yeah,
crap at the bottom, right?
Admittedly, even if I don't, lately with the pop stuff I've been doing, I'll put a filter on and I'll A/B it at 40 hertz, 35 hertz, 30 hertz, things like that, and I'm hearing a difference. It's very subtle, but I'm really concentrating on the sound, and I am hearing a difference. But even on stuff like, say, an electric guitar part, a rhythm part or something, I'll sweep that high pass filter up I go until I hear it affecting something, right? And then I'll back it off a little. But so essentially, I guess what I'm saying is I filter out stuff that I don't even necessarily hear it having an effect on. But I do it anyway, because I'm like, if there's any kind of low-end rumble down there, I just want it gone. And, for the ease of just throwing a filter on there and just, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
So
it's so easy to do.
It's so easy to do that I'm kind of like, a lot of times I throw one on as a matter of course, just like, yeah, I'm sure.
And it just saves you like so much headroom too that people don't even realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Big time. Oh, and you see it if it affects compression big time, right? So low end will just eat up your compressor. So yeah, very, very important.
Yeah.
High pass filter.
For sure. I'm with you on that. So what's something that you like to do with your mixes that other people might think you're crazy for? Do you have like any go-to like wacky chains that you like to try out and get creative with?
I don't think I really do anything crazy or really out there, because I feel like I mainly set up a mix a lot like an analog console and outboard gear. Like I use Pro Tools. I mix in Pro Tools. And to me, Pro Tools is very much that. It's set up like a studio, like I'm used to. That's what I learned on. That's what I came up on. Basically tracking on an even, mixing on an SSL. So I apply that type of mentality to it. Of course, when you're working in the box, you have all this extra routing power, and if you've got one Fairchild plugin, that means you've got as many Fairchilds as you want, or, so you can certainly do stuff like that. I guess I've just been experimenting with some parallel stuff. What else might I do that's a little weird or wacky? Nothing jumps out as any kind of like crazy technique. I guess on a vocal chain, I'm compressing multiple times. I might have a 1176 or LA2. Then I might have a multiband, might have a de-esser, an SSL UAD SSL channel strip, and I'm compressing there. And then I might have the Waves RVox at the end of it. So I might be compressing 3 or 4 times potentially.
It all adds up, right?
It all adds up, yeah. But I don't think that's really crazy. I think a lot of people do that. So,
and when you're doing that, I'm only assuming that you're going fairly light with the compression at each stage.
Yeah, light, or I guess as much as needed, right? Sometimes it's light, or if the vocal is already fairly even and compressed, then you might go heavier just for an effect. And of course, a multi-band compressor, I use that for only when needed, but I'll use that to sort of even out a vocal tonally. And then you do get some gain. You do get a little bit of level compression where you're just controlling the dynamics. But you also get that you also get a more even sound tonally. So yeah, it all depends. It's hard to say, but yeah, I would say subtly to medium per stage. No one compressor is ever carrying the entire load. And if they are, it would get more aggressive as it goes down the chain. As it goes further to the end of the chain, I would say the compression gets a little more aggressive.
Yeah. I'm with you too on that, because I think it's like you want to shape the sound first and then add the character typically at the end, right?
I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
So you've worked with obviously some smaller bands as you were starting off at the studio, and then now you've kind of got to that level where you're working with a lot of bigger bands, and you've done stuff with bands like Placebo or Silverchair and Alexisonfire, all that kind of stuff. How do those sessions differ from working with smaller bands, if at all?
The process doesn't really differ. It's generally the same process. It's just that most often independent or smaller artists don't have the budget to spend as much time as a more established artist or band, and that's really what it comes down to, is having enough time to get things done. The experience of working with a big band who has a bigger budget and spend more time, and it's a little more high level, it translates down to working with smaller artists. I'm fortunate to have gotten to do sessions like that where I can then take what I learn at that high level and translate it down to independent artists I work with. And everything from little production tips and tricks to the workflow to miking techniques or performance techniques or anything like that. It all translates down. So, I mean, the sessions, they differ for kind of the obvious reasons, really. Just that there's more of everything, right? But I guess with more experienced artists, they also approach it differently because they've made, Placebo made 4 or 5 records before I got to work with them. And so it's like, they know what they're doing.
They know the process already.
So, I mean, that was one of my favorite sessions of all time, really, because it was just there was a producer, an engineer, and I was the assistant. And they were very defined roles. And, I was kept very busy on that session and, very happy with what I contributed to it as part of the team. And it was really, really efficient, and it was just great. So it really ran like a well-oiled machine, a real well-oiled engine. There's still lots to do, and there's no slacking or corners cut at all, of course. But it was just great to work with all these people who are on their A game, and so that really challenged me to, okay, I gotta be on my shit too.
Yeah, I guess that's you kind of touched on something there where like you almost had a team of people with these bigger sessions where everyone had their own specific role, right? In the smaller sessions, it's usually like you're wearing all the hats, right?
That's a good point too. I didn't think of it like that, but that's absolutely true. I mean, on so many things I do now, I'm the producer, engineer, and mixer, or co-producer, engineer, and mixer, or co-producer and engineer, and someone else mixes or whatever, But yeah, you're often wearing multiple hats. I think that's more of a trend these days. I think it's really, and especially for our generation of engineers and producers and mixers and stuff, and this new generation of artists coming up. Just in terms of everything from budgets to time to, yeah, it's a lot smaller scale. It's a lot more in-house, It's a closer circle. Again, it all kind of still translates down from a bigger session where you have all those roles. You have one person doing each role like that. It does still trickle down to being one guy producing and recording a band, and that you're going to mix later. You can still take elements of all that, but admittedly, you do have to keep your eye on 5 different things at once, and you're trying to do it in a shorter amount of time, so it's tricky.
For sure. What's a good lesson that you've learned from another producer?
I think in general, from all of these people that I've been fortunate to work with, I think the overall lesson I've learned is that it's all about your ears. Because everyone approaches recording or mixing in different ways, but it all comes down to using your ears. It's not necessarily the gear, right? I've seen people, kind of get obsessive over writing down. They'll be in a session, they're looking at how does so-and-so EQ a kick drum, and how do they EQ this or that? And to me, I've always thought, well, it's kind of goofy because, every kick drum's going to sound different. Like, what does the source sound like? So it's always been more important for me to figure out why they're doing what they're doing as opposed to exactly what they're doing. It's like, why are you boosting that frequency? Oh, it's to get this out of the sound. So that might be a different frequency on a different source, but it's more like, why are you doing that?
It all just really comes down to the mindset behind it.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
everybody's ears are going to be different, and everyone has a different view of what the sound should sound like. But it's getting into the mindset of, okay, why are they treating it this way, and what's the effect they're going for, and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that was probably the biggest, overall in general, the biggest lesson to learn was use your ears and getting some good ear training in the process, right? That was,
of course,
a big benefit too.
Of course.
And get the sounds correct at the source when recording. That is crucial.
It's huge.
Huge.
So many people think they can fix it in the mix, but at that point, it's like too late a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's really, that's one thing where there's really no ambiguity on it. The whole, everyone, there's memes about it and people joke all the time, oh, fix it in the mix. That is one thing that is 100% true. If at any point you're at a stage where it's like, oh, fix it in the mix, you're in trouble.
You definitely have to get it right at the source. I know that there's always those people that, like, I think it was Gene Simmons who said, like, you can't polish a turd, but you can spray paint it gold. But
yes.
But at the end of the day, it's still a turd, right? So
yes, exactly.
Yeah, so you got to get it right at the source for sure. So we all learn from trial and error and making mistakes in the studio. Can you think of an example of something that maybe you're in a session and something went disastrously wrong or something like that? And what did you learn from that experience?
Oh yeah, I probably have a story or two of some studio train wrecks, some of which I was definitely mostly responsible for. I don't know that I'd get into specifics of those, but I think anyone who was an assistant at a large studio will definitely have some stories of times when they definitely fucked up. Everyone will have those. I've even heard stories about very famous mixers or engineers who someone said, oh yeah, so-and-so, they were, I worked with them when they were, and they, did something that was like, they made a big mistake. And you always hear back in the day, someone, oops, I hit record, but the other track was armed and I erased Buddy's guitar solo or something like that. These things happen. And you're right. Everyone learns by those mistakes. I mean, the main thing that I always tried to take away from things like that, be they major or minor, was, I would say to myself, okay, pay attention, always pay attention, concentrate on what you're doing. And if you don't know something, ask. I've rarely had an issue when I admit that I don't, when in the past when I haven't understood what's going on or someone's instructions aren't clear. I've never had a problem asking for clarification on it. And when I work with assistants or young engineers or interns or something, that's the first thing I say. I always say, never feel like you can't ask a question. There are no stupid questions, and I will explain. So never feel like you can't ask a question. Yeah. Always. That's totally open, because it's better for me to explain it and you do it right than having to kind of figure it out in the heat of the moment and undo something that's wrong. Yeah, sometimes you just can't undo it. You've done too much damage at that point. Yeah, you really don't want to get to that point. Yeah. So yeah, always good to just ask and clarify. And yeah, I can think of a particular thing when I was assisting on a mix where I patched something wrong, and it ended up sort of creating an issue that down the line the mixer discovered, wait a minute, if that's patched in there, then it's going in here, and that's why something was sounding weird to me this whole time. And I was like, oh no. And what I should have done was ask, because it was a complicated setup and a complicated patch. And, I remember putting a patch cable in there, and all of a sudden, oh, it worked. And I was like, okay, whew, we're good. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do this, but looks like it's working. But not quite. It did, but it didn't. So it was all good. There was no major issue, but yeah, you had to go back and kind of go over those things again and fix it. So I started like, oh, right. I really should have taken the time to clarify and not just been like, okay, I got it done. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
It's like, get it done, but, is it done right? And so, yeah, asking questions when you don't know is good. If anyone ever makes you feel stupid for asking a question, in an honest and genuine way, because you're trying to learn and you're trying to do your best and help them out doing it, I don't really respect people that will, make you feel little for asking a question. That's, you run into those people from time to time, but the best mentors are the people who, inspire you to do your best work. And a big part of that is being able to ask them questions and being able to admit that, I'm kind of green. I don't know exactly what you mean there. Can you explain it? And I think that they should be able to help you out in those situations. And then everyone wins.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have any special tools or tips that you use that have helped you with either the quality of your mixes or just like the speed of your workflow or something like that?
The number one thing in terms of workflow and this is the obvious statement of the century here, but is being organized. So specific to mixing, having an organized mix session is key. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And thankfully, I feel like that's a very commonly taught practice in terms, there's a lot of mix tutorials and things out there. And I feel like the idea of having a super organized mix or a mix template or whatever is, especially being in the box, but even on a console or whatever, I feel like that's a very commonly taught thing. It's a common practice now, and that's great. I mean, to me, it's crucial. I have a mix template. I have, things set up with reverbs and the sends all named and all that. I have some signal chains preset, but normally I kind of, I'll experiment with a few things, but it's basically just getting out of the way all the little things like make new track, set the input, set the output, bus it here, bus it there, blah, blah, blah. Put your plugin on, find your kind of the setting that you always sort of start out with. Do all that ahead of time. Get all that set up ahead of time, and then you can just fly if you. So I like to prep a session and get most of the nuts and bolts work out of the way first, even in terms of balancing out some tracks. Like I'll even do a little bit of level balancing and then come back to it with fresh ears and really hit the creative aspects of it. Because mixing is a balance between both, right? It's a technical pursuit, and it's artistic as well. So keeping all of that organized is really important. So it doesn't take your head out of the game. So I would say really good session prep, having all your edits done, and set up your routing, set up your busing, things like that. As much as you can get that very hammer and nails workflow out of the way, so that the next time you sit down you can just start pushing faders. That's key.
Yep, I agree with that. There's so much setup time that people waste by doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Exactly. Yeah. If you find yourself doing the same thing over and over again, make that a preset. Make that saved.
That's your template.
That's your template, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think people might have a bad impression of that kind of thing, or think it's cookie cutter, but it doesn't have to be. It's just smart. I mean, if you always mixed out of the same studio in the analog days and you had these 4 reverbs and that's all you had, well, you'd be smart to set them up on the 4 effect sends, the 4 sends on the console. Why not just have them patched in there? It's one, you're going to anyway. You only have those 4.
Exactly.
Why don't you just do that? There's nothing wrong with setting up signal chains and having go-to stuff, and then also realizing that, don't just do that out of out of habit, experiment, try new things.
Yeah, it can
But-
always be changed.
Always be changed, but the starting point, have yourself a good starting point, a good jump off point, and you'll just be all the better for it.
For sure. So a lot of people listening to this are relatively new in their career, or they've been doing it for a little while and they're trying to just step up their game a bit. What advice do you have for someone who's just getting started with mixing?
Well, number one, be organized, right? So like we were just
Yep.
talking about, get, try your best to figure out organizational techniques. When it actually comes to the, pushing faders and actually making moves and getting a sound, I think, start with the foundation of mixing, which in my mind is getting a good balance. It really all starts there, a good relationship between all the instruments level-wise and panning-wise. Don't start throwing compressors on kick drums and effects on vocals when you don't have a sense of where all that's going to sit as one whole unit. So I think starting out with just moving the faders up and down and getting a balance is great practice to start. And also really learn your tools, because we all have access to a million different plugins. But do you know the sonic difference between an 1176 and an LA2A, and which one works best over the other in which situation? Or with EQ, like if you have a parametric EQ, experiment with how boosting or cutting affects the sound, a narrow frequency range or a wide bandwidth, things like that. I think if you're new to mixing, there's so many different moving parts in a mix that if you just start flying away, you might end up with something that's less cohesive.
It's pretty overwhelming, all the plugins that are out there.
Yeah, incredibly overwhelming. And so,
And most people use like 3 in the end, right?
Oh, I know. I've bought so many plugins that if I could go back and return all the plugins that I don't use that I've paid for, I could probably buy a new guitar with it or something. It's ridiculous. Yeah, you have your go-tos and learn, start with just a couple plugins. Start with a channel strip. Get some drums up and put an SSL channel strip on every one and only use that. Try stuff like that. I would say that's probably a good way to get started. I think it takes some practice. And it's also, there's no harm in diving right in there and going nuts. You'll learn things there, but pay attention about what you're doing that isn't working so well as much as what you do like. I got a lot of great feedback on mixing from mastering engineers. I worked a lot with a mastering engineer when I was at Metalworks named Scott Lake, and he's a great recording engineer and mixer, and he's just got really great ears. So I would bring in things I'd do with bands there, and he would master them. And sometimes he'd go, "Oh man, dude, the vocal's really harsh. It's like cutting my ears off. Are you boosting a lot of this or that?" And I'm like, yeah, I am. He's like, "Okay, well, don't do that." He's like, "Hey, maybe try putting a de-esser on these vocals." And a couple times when he was around there mastering, he'd pop into the studio if I was working on something, and he'd give me some tips and stuff. And eventually, it got to the point where, like those mixes that I described earlier on, the heavy progressive stuff, he mastered that, and he said, "Yeah, good work. This sounds good." So I've always valued the feedback of mastering engineers in particular on mixes. I feel like I've gotten some very useful feedback from them about what I was doing wrong. I think, is to circle back to my point, is they helped me correct errors in what I was doing, like quote unquote errors,
Yeah.
right? But I would always ask them, do you have any critiques? How are my overall balances? How's the top end, the low end, the this, the that? What did you have to do to it to make it sound better? And they'd say, well, it's a little harsh in this area and a little this or that. So try this, try that. And that feedback really helped me. So, I guess my point with all that, with that long-winded story is, also focus on the negatives. Focus on what you're doing that doesn't work as well, and try and correct those things. Because it's easy to oh man, I love how I made that reverb sound and that delay. Oh, it's all really cool. It's like, yeah, but your low end is mushy, or the top end is really harsh, or listen to all that sibilance on the vocal, blah blah blah, things like that. So, be a little bit self-conscious and self-critical. You can, a little constructive criticism is a good thing.
Yeah. You mentioned that you often send stuff out for mastering. Do you always send your stuff out for mastering, or do you do some of it yourself too?
I always recommend it. There are certain things where an artist will go, hey, you know what? We're just doing this little EP or this couple songs ourselves. Can you master these? And sometimes I'll go, oh, okay. Kind of reluctantly. I never ever, sometimes people ask me straight up, they say, do you do mastering? And I say, no. I never, I've gotten to work with a number of great mastering engineers, and I've learned so much from them. I understand the, what goes into it and the art form. And it's a whole other thing. So I don't want to be a mastering engineer. I want someone else to take over that step. So to me, I always recommend have a professional do it, because there are so many great mastering engineers. And just like mixing, there are so many different methods and techniques with mastering. It's a real art form unto itself. So I'm very interested in the process, but more so as it helps me as a mixer. I mean, I've even gone so far as to Noah Mintz at Lacquer Channel offers from time to time, he does these like half-day or one-day mastering courses, sort of. And I did one of those, and it was just great. I've had a lot of stuff mastered by him, and the first time I worked with him, he let me sit in on an EP mastering. And, we just kind of talked about music and mixing and mastering and stuff like that. Of course, I let him do his thing, and he kills it. He's great. So even though I wanted to take a little course from him to, learn more about the mastering process, it certainly wasn't to be able to call myself a mastering engineer. I would rather encourage people to budget for a really good mastering engineer, because they're worth their weight in gold. So yeah, to me, if we've all got the software, right? I got Ozone and limiters and whatever, just like anyone else. So it's fun to play around with. But man, if I have to master something I do, I'm kind of like, I feel like it's a shot in the dark. I'm going, is this it?
What just because you have the plugins
the way I want it. Yeah.
Just because you have the plugins doesn't make you a mastering engineer.
No. In fact, when I do go through and master something that I'm mixing, I actually sort of incorporate it as part of the process. Like, I'll get the mix to a certain point, and I know that my overall levels are good, and I've got a balance, and I've got the main thing going, and I haven't automated anything yet, maybe, but I've really got the bulk of the mix sitting in a spot where, okay, now I'll start doing the finer points from here. At that point, I might throw on an Ozone or something and start going through the mastering chain, kind of incorporating it all into the process. So again, it's just me kind of guessing at what would, what's the best way to do it. So, and that's not to knock anyone who is, a younger engineer that wants to get into mastering and that is pursuing it and trying to get work doing mastering. Just the same as anyone who would say, oh yeah, I mix music too. Well, there's different levels of experience, and there's so not to knock anyone, but for me personally, I think it's too high level that I don't even trust myself with it. I trust there's a lot of great ears out there in the mastering world, so
Sure.
I've been blown away by some mastering that's come back. I've been like, this is, yeah, there you go. There's the gold standard.
That's what you're looking for when you send it off that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure. What about for people who are kind of in the earlier stages of their career with getting new clients? Any advice for that kind of stuff?
Wow, that's true. I wish someone would give me advice about that. Anyone? How can I get some more clients?
It's almost seems like it's all word of mouth, and it's not like you're seeing Facebook ads or something like that for engineers, or at least I don't see any
exactly.
of that.
I don't either, and I feel like the general consensus is if you did see that, you might go, oh man, that's tacky. I don't know. Again, not to knock anyone who does it. If hey, do your thing, but for me, it's all word of mouth. Again, I kind of did a very traditional route where I started at a studio and worked there for many years and worked with people regularly over that time, regular producers and engineers and mixers that would come in, and bands that would come in every couple of years to do a thing or whatever. And I mean, just last weekend, I did a session with a guy who I worked with at Metalworks probably 7 or 8 years ago. Out of the blue, he hit me up and he said, "Hey, we're looking to do some more stuff. I remember working with you back in the day. Really, really liked it, and I see that you're still doing it and doing your thing. So we'd love to work with you again." I'm like, "Great, who would have thought?"
Well, that's just something then about kind of just your personality and people remembering you for that, right? Remembering the quality of your work and
there you go.
Who you
Okay,
are, right?
well, you've brought up a very, very good point there, about how to get clients, and yeah, sure, there's all that stuff on the business side, but on the personal side, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from an engineer was he was talking to if I remember his story correctly, he was talking to like a session player that he knew, and the session player said, "You want to know how to get lots of work? Like, what do you think it is that? Why do I get lots of work? Why do you how do you get lots of work?" The guy said, "Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you got to be the best. You got to be like hot shit at what you do." He's like, "Yeah, you got to be good, but that's not really it." And he said, "Oh, I don't know what. So what is it?" He goes, "You just got to be." He's like, "You got to be a good person. You got to be the kind of person that people want to work with." So one thing I've always loved about working in music, working with musicians, doing the studio thing, is that you really get to let your personality out. You get to let your personality be shown, and that's always fun. I've always liked that. Certain jobs, certain careers, your personality isn't important. It's not, do your job is the important part. And yeah, every business is a people business, right? You've always got to connect with people on a personal level because people want to work with, it doesn't matter what business, what industry, people want to work with people that they like. Yes, you have to produce results, but that's like the minimum entry, right? That's the minimum requirement. You've got to produce results. But if you can produce results and be the type of person that people want to hang around and, that they have, because it's music, right? We're working on art here. We're working with people's songs and emotions and stuff. So if you can be the type of person that people want to be around and that they can personally trust with, letting you into their head and into their art and get your hands all over their art, then that's a huge part of it. So that's a good point you bring up about, your personality and your attitude.
Yeah, it's so important.
Very important.
Yep.
That's probably longevity-wise, that's probably the most important thing to get clients and maintain clients is be the type of person that people want to work with and want to hang out in a room with for 10, 12 hours or more.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to that point where we're going to start to wrap things up a little bit. How can people find you online and get in touch with you if they want to do some work with you or something like that?
I have all the social medias, as we all do. There's
Yep.
the Instagrams and Facebook, and I don't know, no Snapchat. I haven't figured that one out.
I haven't used that one yet either.
Snapchat is more complicated than mixing to me. So forget that noise. And otherwise, I have a website, KevinDietzMusic.com. Just all the requisite stuff. And
Awesome.
my email is KevinDietzMusic@gmail.com. So anyone feel free to hit me up for any reason whatsoever.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on here, and I think you had a lot of really awesome advice, so I'm sure the listeners will appreciate it and learn a lot from it.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it's fun to talk about this stuff. It's fun to kind of go over and sort of recap, and you don't think about this kind of stuff on a daily basis.
For
so
sure.
It's interesting to try and put all those thoughts into words, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. So that was my chat with Kevin Dietz. I hope you enjoyed that nearly as much as I did. He shared some awesome advice in there, and I had a great time talking with him. If this is your first time hearing about Master Your Mix, make sure to check out the website, MasterYourMix.com, and on the website at the top of the page, there's a link to download your free copy of my Ultimate Mixing Blueprint. It's a guide to help you with using EQ and compression. I show you different frequency ranges to look out for and different characteristics of different instruments that you want to be paying attention to. And the idea behind it is to help you get better results much faster with your mixes and just have a quick reference guide in case you need anything as you're going along and you feel stuck. So make sure to check that out. And if you like what you heard in this podcast, please make sure to subscribe to it on iTunes or on Android or whatever platform you use. And make sure to leave us a review and a comment on the iTunes store too, if you can. That'd be great. Helps us get exposed to many more people online and spread the word and continue to make these episodes. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Take care, guys. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit masteryourmix.com.